簡単にはテルは降らないぜイエスマンになりそびれた悪に残されたのという名の Justice を Breaking the law Breaking the world 壊せ
Wait, hello? Hello, hello? Oh, okay, now it's working. Wait, hello? Okay. Cool. Just gonna wait and see if other people are gonna join. How do I like make the audio not terrible? So that's my mic. No. First, before we go into that, I'll say what these words are. So we got the AI overview. We got the AI. I'll go through this later. Basically, trusts are essentially these big companies that basically do the same thing. So they come together and they form a monopoly to Disney is a good example. Disney is like primarily known as like the film industry, and they've started taking over other film franchises and other things outside of the film industry, and they've started to create this monopoly of all these big products that consumers use. So they're kind of like, no matter what you buy on certain things, they're going to be a factor in it. Like if they bought out Pixar and all that, then they would definitely be like the monopoly franchise of animated movies. But they still got competition, which is what makes them different. So the main thing back in 1890 to 1911 with the Anti-Sherman Trust Act is oil and tobacco companies were merging together into those monopolies called trusts. And William Howard Taft, using the Antitrust Act, essentially got the Supreme Court to disband these monopolies, and it protected user consumerism. Monopolies, same kind of thing as trusts, basically. It's just big mega companies that have overtaken an industry, like Mattel. I don't know if any of you guys know about that, but Mattel is like this huge company, and it has like a whole bunch of different labels under it. I think it has, what is it? Let me search this up. That's Monopoly. It has so many different things that it essentially becomes this mega corporation. So if you're looking for stuff for your kid, as your toddler, your baby, whatever, 90% of what they're going to consume is probably going to be Mattel. So Mattel basically controls that market, and that's when things like the Antitrust Act would come together, and they would fight against these monopolies that have taken over an industry, and they protect consumerism. Consumerism is, well, it's the consumer. It's the consumer buying things. It's basically capitalism. It's essentially the theory that supply and demand, and in a free market economy, people are going to buy things that they want, and the companies that aren't having their products bought are going to die out, and that's just how it goes. And inevitably, it will end up with things like Mattel arising. So if we go over to the Taft and Anti-Sherman Trust Act in more detail, the guy who it involves is Taft, William Howard Taft, and it's from Britannica. It involves Standard Oil Co. and American Tobacco Co. And what does it involve? It involves Taft pushing for separation of these corporations under the Antitrust Act. The Antitrust Act itself, however, was signed into a law, like something you could charge someone under back in 1890, although this specific case of it being used was in 1911. It was, of course, in the United States Supreme Court, and the reason why it happened was because the Supreme Court had found the corporations guilty of inhibiting competition, and they were monopolizing the industry among tobacco and oil. Because like being successful itself isn't enough reason for someone to like try to tear you down, but it's when you're kind of like, think of it as like a tree, right? A bunch of trees in a tree forest, and the canopy of one of the trees is like blocking out all the other trees, so they can't get sunlight and they can't grow. That's kind of what these monopolies do. It's not that it's inherently wrong to make money and to like prioritize profit, but when you're either sacrificing the safety or quality of your consumers' goods for money and you're not adjusting those costs properly, or when you're going ahead and you're squashing the competition so other companies can't make better quality things and innovate in the industry, that's when things like the Anti-Sherman Trust Act would be implemented, and that's what William Howard Taft did. Ignore this. For some of these, the gray text will just, on the right side, it'll just be for current events or reminders of things that I need to say. Sorry, if you can look underneath the gray text on the political spectrum, you'll see that there's a little spectrum, a little chart, if you will. And this is meant to, if I could get it off, I can't. So you have, in the middle, you have moderate, then on the left you have liberal, leftist, and socialist /communist. On the right conservative, right-wing, and fascist. And the way of how the world was before this came into effect, it was probably more towards. I would say it was still conservative, because in nature, back in the 18th to 1900s, it was still very conservative, with like women can't vote, or generals, or just in general. It didn't really shift until I think the 1970s, I want to say. But it probably shifted a bit more to the left. I would still say it's conservative, so I would say it was conservative, and then it shifted a bit more between conservative and modern in the middle. And the reason why this is important is because without things like this, companies could just take over. Like, imagine McDonald's just taking over Burger King and A&W and literally every single fast food joint in the world, and then nothing really tasted as good, because no companies were striving to make good foods just for the sake of it or for profit. There's no incentive, really. There's some current things like Microsoft, I remember a little while ago, had something similar happen. They were waiting for coal to break up. I think it was due to social media, like Facebook. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong thing here. But I remember something about Facebook specifically with Mark Zuckerberg. Facebook and Instagram and MySpace and all that were all like being threatened to be broken up, because they were worried about the quality of the app. Things like, there was recently this guy, I can't remember, he was accused of cheating in real chess, and now he's saying he's going to sue chess.com, but under the Antitrust Act, because chess.com is so popular and so huge that it's essentially taking over the chess industry, and there's no way for him to make a living off of it. So it's basically inhibiting his right to innovate, or to creatively, not creatively, but to create in that industry, I guess. Of course, people like Disney, I wouldn't be surprised if they came under fire with this. We do have research videos and some sources here. If you want, go to Britannica, about the William Howard Taft constitutional law, Kent Yale, blah, blah, blah. That's where I got the image for this guy. The research video I looked at was this one. I won't click on it because it'll take you directly there, but maybe we can go visit it after if you have any questions. Let me check to see if anything's and then over here we have a research article. It's kind of blocked out over here, but this was just a State of Union history that I looked at. Another big issue back then, of course, was like companies were prioritizing like profit and automation. It was like after the Industrial Revolution, so people were prioritizing profit more than their like workers, and that obviously caused a huge riot. And I think that was what pushed for the signing of the Antitrust Act in 1890. And without it, I think that there would be a lot more incentive, or like there's no regulations in place to stop these companies from mistreating their workers or maintaining of their quality for their products. But, then if we go back over here, the Roaring '20s is our next stop. So it was a post-World War I time period where demand-side economics drove economic growth, rapid urbanization, and prosperity among the U.S. and Canada. A lot of these you're going to see are affecting the U.S. and Canada, but demand-side economics. That would just be supply and demand, right? I would check the source here, but then I'd have to go out. Give me a second. Let me quickly look this up. I swear I know what it is. Yeah, so just like supply and demand drives economic growth, because when you're a company and you have this one product and a bunch of people want it and they're buying it, then you have more money to make more of that product, more money to hire more people to make more of that product, and then you drive it's not contributing, because then only you're the benefiting from it, and you're not really pumping anything out into the economy. You're probably more conservative in that way, and you're probably keeping more of that money for yourself. Also, one sec, I gotta plug in my computer. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to say so in chat, and then when I check, I'll review it. There will be a Kahoot at the end, by the way. I don't know. Oh no, it's not on screen anymore. But there will be a Kahoot at the end of this. Actually, I think it's still on. There will be a Kahoot at the end. There. And I think that should stay, right? Yes. Oh, cool. Thank you. Thank you. I didn't see. Thank you, Rumple Steel something. I'm not gonna say the rest, but thank you. I appreciate you saying something. I don't know if you're still here or not. I can't really see. But oh, let me continue on with this now. Okay. So otherwise, urbanization is, well, it's making an area more urban. So like if you have just a piece of land, like prairie land, and then you started making it more, like you start adding businesses or towns. I think it's just the idea of making something more consumer driven. So like making a capitalist economy, developing a city. Yeah, that should be it, right? I would check these definitions, but excuse me for one sec while I quickly check this definition. Because we got monopoly, already did that. Consumerism, already did that. Trust, already did that. Urbanization, and demand side economics, and economic prosperity. Okay. Okay. And just let me make sure that's this. I'll put myself here for now. So over here, urbanization, making an area more urban. How do I explain it more? I think it's just making something more capitalist and providing more jobs and opportunities economically. Then we have prosperity, specifically economic prosperity. It's just in terms of economic growth, creating competitiveness, and consumer driven, obviously. And then demand side economics are an economic theory that states that high demand for supply and demand is basically what we want to check on. Okay, so then we'll click on more information. Oh, sorry. Why is it doing that? Deleted slide. Sorry about that. I'm just gonna have to go over here for this one. The Roaring Twenties. Okay. So it affected mainly U.S. and Canadian citizens coming out of the World War I. Here was obviously also heavily affected by this. It's just that I'm mainly talking about the U.S. and Canada. That's like where I live. But what happened was an economic boom that preceded the ending of World War I, because after all these competitors for certain things like car manufacturing or like technology were essentially broke. They didn't have enough money to drive their own economic growth while trying to rebuild like all this housing and all this infrastructure. It left the U.S. and Canada with this state of where they're the main suppliers, exporters, importers of like all products. So it gave them a lot more economic freedom in that sense, and they were able to price things, and they were the first who people would buy from. So it's kind of like, imagine you are selling like still growing their berry tree, and you get ahead. And it doesn't mean that you're always going to be the only one. It's just that you have a time period where you have more luxury than others. And going into the Great Depression, I think that that was one of the biggest issues, because people weren't focused on the fact that it won't always be like this. And then when things stopped being like that, it kind of caused a panic. But it was blah, blah, blah. Already explained that. All right, this is an image of citizens celebrating after World War I. The image was from New York Times. There's the image source if you want it for some reason. I'm just crediting them. And then over here we have a research video, and we have a research article on Botanica. And we might go back to these videos. It just depends on what we have time for. Let me move this back now. And actually, I could probably move up here. Okay. So then, the political shift would be. Well, I mean, the government didn't really intervene at this point because they didn't need to. It was very consumer-driven, very capitalist. I would say it was more. I don't know. Again, I would probably say conservative because people were holding ideals, and there wasn't that much government control. But there was a certain mindset that was more conservative, because conservatism is keeping the status quo, and there wasn't any hard shifts for change at that time period. So I would still say it's conservative. I would just say that it's conservative, and it probably stayed conservative. Current applications. I think if anything, it's more of a lesson, and it helped put in regulations later on, which we'll get into with banks, and that didn't allow them to essentially just take all their stocks and leave everyone, because then that just drives down the value of everyone else's stocks, and then that just basically ruins the economy for people who have invested in these things. So they did change that. It introduced more government control. I would say it's more important because it made us realize how much we needed government control in our lives. Because back then, no one wants taxes, no one wants anything to do with like giving up their own productiveness and their own quality of life. But then when you really take into account how easily that can be turned against us, then people will realize, oh no, we want some sort of safety net or some sort of control, which eventually would lead to a more liberal shift. But I don't think there was any major shift to the left at this time period. And then if we go back, we the Great Depression followed right after, and it was caused by a lot of things, but basically I think what it was first caused by competition. There's competition now with other countries like Japan that slowly caught up. Japan and Germany have caught up in the automaking industries, and then that threatened the U.S. and Canada. And it wasn't just cars, it was other things like exports for minerals and oils. But cars, for an example, car manufacturing became a lot more safer. Like in Japan, they prioritized safety and reliability, and that was a bigger appeal to some people, which ended up making them buy from Japan, which took away from the American economy and and Canada economy, which would cause a panic, and then banks would essentially take out all of their stock, and it would leave people with nothing, and then other people would pull out, and then that caused a stock market crash, and then it eventually led to stagflation. If we look up here, a combination of high inflation, high unemployment, and slow economic growth. Oh, there was low employment, or high unemployment at that time, because when all these banks closed, a lot of them failed and they went under, and then that led to less jobs, and then certain industries just weren't being bought out as much anymore, because then there's competition, and then that caused less jobs, and it just kind of led to this point of stagflation is what they call it. It's just really slow economic growth, or a halt to it, and I don't know if it would count as a decline or not, but I don't know. At that time, it was just a period of stagflation. And then I'm gonna click on this and hopefully it links properly. Seriously? Alright, it's not linking for some reason. Yep, weird. Oh, those link. Okay, so there. Let me just make sure. I want to check out Spotify real quick. Enable reach. Okay. There we go. So the Great Depression, 1929 to 1939, affected the working class of the U.S., Canada, and Europe. And it caused widespread unemployment and poverty, and it was pretty much felt all across the world. Because again, even though the U.S. was not having as much competition anymore, they were still like probably the largest exporter at the time, and it's like when the U.S. then suffered even greatly. It's kind of like a mild thing happened, and then people in the U.S. Canada responded greatly to it, and then that caused their own demise, because then all these people are taking their money and they're like they're hoarding it and they're scared that they're going to lose their money, and then that just affects everyone else. So it kind of was like a domino reaction. Someone like just gently blew on them, and then all the stacks started to fall, and then everyone else was like, oh no, well now this is so much more expensive for me because it was from the US and now hardly anyone makes it, and then that makes it more expensive because I want this, but there's not a lot of jobs or opportunities. And then there was also just a lot of unemployment there in general, which made it hard for many citizens. Ignore the voice crack. And it was mainly caused by bank runs, which we already went over. It's just like when a bank decides to pull all their assets, I'm pretty sure. Let me just double check that. Or bank run. It is... Yeah, when a bank run or run on the bank occurs when many clients withdraw their money from a bank. Oh, yeah. So it wasn't the bank pulling, it was people in the bank pulling, which did include some people who owned the bank, obviously, because a bank has to have some sort of startup money, usually from one person. But yeah, when a bank just runs out of people who are invested in it, then it fails, and that led to a lot of people then deciding I'm also going to pull because my bank might fail. And yeah, it's just it's kind of like the honor system in a sense. It's very fragile when something starts to go wrong, but normally it's fine when everyone's sensible and they're calm and they're like all there. Here is an image of a work progress administration worker receiving a paycheck, and then there's the source for that image. There's a YouTube research video over here and a Britannica research article over here if you want to look more into it. Current applications, I'd say, again, this ties into the Roaring Twenties. It was more of a lesson than anything. I would say that nowadays the impact isn't as greatly felt as how great it must have been back then. I mean, we're kind of going, in Canada at least over here, and especially with the tariffs now, we're going through this period of high inflation and taxation. The carton of eggs is like how much more, like 200% more, it's crazy. And then with the tariffs, it's just only adding on to that. So I'll just say it's a lesson to how the government is going to handle today's economics. But back then, the government then took a more authoritative stance, so they were definitely more what's the word, utilitarian, I think? So more left-leaning, and then not fascist, not that, left-leaning, and they wanted to, but they also at the same time wanted to still uphold certain values, like gender roles and stuff. So I would say it's a mix, and I know that doesn't really work. That's why there's like a T spectrum, but I don't have the T spectrum. So I'd say in terms of like social stuff, it was still conservative, very much. It was trying to uphold normal norms, but as you quickly see, it took a sharp left turn, and it became more leftist or liberal, and utilitarian, I think, or authoritarian. slides about that, but I think next we have something about Canada. Yeah, Canada's response to the Great Depression. Over here. No, wait. In a similar response to the U.S. Canadian economics had shifted to a more liberal-centered ideology of where the lower working class was just trying to recover through the government aid and welfare that the government was providing now. And economics came to kind of a halt after the Roaring '20s, and it had slowed down significantly since the stock market crash. So yeah, it was a point of stagflation, of where high inflation and high unemployment and slow economic growth. Just click on this. It was like from 1929 to 1939 is I think kind of when the brunt of it was, and then it started to get a bit better. But this one specifically, we're going into Canada. So in Canada, millions of people, millions of Canadians had become unemployed, hungry, and even homeless. Poverty was on the rise, and it was from provinces all across Canada. But when I was researching it with my Canadian Encyclopedia article, which you can check out like the link down below. But when I was researching it, I found that the prairies in Western Canada were the most affected because you didn't have as many jobs for farming. A lot of farmers had failed. Like, not they had failed as people, obviously. They were probably fine as individuals, but like in terms of like their work, a lot of them had to close because, well, with how high prices had gotten, it became almost impossible to run things. So like individual business owners had a much harder time than bigger companies that were privatized and had their own little pool of money that they could control. And even still, with banks, it became especially hard for banks, even though some of them are privatized because, well, you need people to invest in you. But the thing that impacted farmers in the prairies in Western Canada the most was also, surprisingly, weather at that time was really bad, apparently, and it caused crops to be very poor in quality, and it became harder to grow crops, which ended up making trade a lot harder, because you can't just sell someone a really rock hard piece of corn and be like, that'll be $5. No one's gonna pay you for that. And it happened mainly because I think, of course, Canada had its own economic system, but it relied heavily, and it still does rely heavily. That's why we're seeing so much issues with the tariffs and stuff. It relied heavily on importing and exporting from the U.S. because, well, we don't have that many pipelines. We had a pipeline deal a while ago, but Trudeau chose not to do it, probably to appeal to the NDP party because he needed the votes to get reelected. But yeah, there was really no way for Canada to be self-sufficient or independent. Especially, like, you could, I guess, theoretically spend the extra dollar to make it work. But when you have all these people who are homeless, millions of people who are unemployed and homeless and who need help, you gotta prioritize them. Because as a country, you're obviously meant to prioritize your citizens over yourself. And I don't know. I don't think that there was many ways that they could have handled it. I think that after, Canada should have learned its lesson and they should have expanded a bit more, but then we're kind of seeing what we're seeing here today, the tariffs against Canada from the U.S. and the Canada tariffing the U.S. as well. So we'll see how that goes. Maybe we have learned something, but I don't know. But this was especially in Canada as well, where we saw a leftist shift. We saw it, I would say, go more leftist liberal. It never really got to communist, but there were a lot more welfare programs that were introduced and a lot more social programs. So basically, like unemployment checks, or what else would that be? There would be different job opportunities, I guess. What was it really? Let me see. No, because what would it be? I guess it would be more support for families who are unemployed. I don't exactly know what that would be. I would have to research it more. I might go back and research it after we do this first little, because we'll do the first half of the timeline and then maybe we'll go back and watch some videos and stuff. But yeah, I don't know how to explain. Just support for families who are suffering from financial income during the Great Depression. a welfare state and a mixed economy through more social programs and higher government spending to help get out of a deficit. A deficit is just where you like are spending more money or you're losing money. You know, it's like if you have a bottle of water and you poke a hole in that water and then you're leaking water, you are deficiting. You are losing more than you are gaining, right? So if I poked a hole in one side of the bottle and then I like started pouring in water from the top and there's more water going into the bottle than there is pouring out and I'm starting to overflow at the top, that's not a deficit. That's the opposite. I don't exactly know what that'd be, an overflow, I guess. Social programs are just government support for underfunded or unfortunate families who need the help and support, who don't have jobs or who have a lower income and can't provide for their families, primarily because they were impacted by the Great Depression. And then there was the welfare state. Welfare state is just basically turning a more socialist thing. This was where you start to, it wasn't communism, it wasn't that, but it was definitely more socialist. It was very close to there, because now you see, I remember, you see a mixed economy. It's more government intervention and people design amongst themselves. Like, it's still supply and demand, but then there's government regulation, which with Keynesian economics was basically higher taxation on certain things, but you also pumped more money into the economy. So it was like, let me go to the slide here real quick. Oh, and a recession is a time period of less economic growth. I'm 99% sure I will double check that soon. But Keynesian economics were essentially this guy, John Maynard Keynes. Sorry, I really just was writing this stuff down and I wasn't reading it fully. I didn't practice before this. But it was John Maynard Keynes who created Keynesian economics, and the United States and Canada who were the biggest implementers of it, I would say. I'm sure that Europe and other countries implemented it, but these are the ones that we're going to talk about. So what it was a book that I think was 1933 officially published by John Maynard Keynes, but he was talking about it since 1930, and it became it was adapted by, who was it adapted by? I want to say Reagan, but I'm not 100% sure. But it was adapted and it was implemented somewhere from the 1930s, and it was used until the 1970s, until it kind of fell out of favor. People were like, hey, we don't like taxation, we want more of our own stuff, so then regulations kind of lifted. But here, on the political spectrum, ignore the tax. It was very much more towards a socialist or communist society, because it was people going ahead and saying we need help from the government, and the government would come in, and what they would do is they would pump the money into the economy to help relieve some of the struggle, and they would provide jobs. I think in Canada, like 3 million jobs were provided or something, and it provided the growth that people needed to finally earn money. And then when there were high times of spending, so say maybe Christmas is like the number one highest time of the year when people spend money. What would happen then is that the government would raise taxes, and they would collect some of that money back and then some, and then that would help incentivize people to keep working afterwards, because then the taxes would go back down. And it was just a lot of government regulation, so it wasn't leftist, or was it? Let me check one thing. Yeah, so it wasn't like one person, like in communism, it's not one person controlling things. It's no, that's not. It would be it'd be more socialist in the sense that it's providing social welfare programs and promoting a welfare state of where the citizens are treated more equally, and they're trying to get out of that deficit. but at the same time, it's not like the government has complete control. But sorry, I lost my train of thought though. But they would raise taxes, and then when more money was being spent, that's when they would raise taxes, and then they would lower it, and then it was just a way to help get the economy flowing again and incentivize spending. Because some of these people, keep in mind, there were a lot of unemployed people, but then there were people who were benefited from the stock market crash because they were able to like rug pull, like with Bitcoin and stuff. People rug pull on things like cryptocurrency, and then everyone else is left in shambles. And then because the price of the stock has dropped and no one wants it, but then they are the ones with the most money at the end of it, and then they're living fine. But that's a select few, and this incentivized people to spend more money, and then it helped redistribute that flow of economy. Because pumping money into the economy would solve things. It would still just end up staying with one select group of people, but this helped kind of stabilize it. Over here you have a picture of John Maynard Keynes. The image is from New York Times. Here's the source. Here's a research video and article. We'll go over these a bit more later. And in 2007, during the housing crisis, this was also implemented, I believe. We'll have to see. I need to go. We go over the 2007 housing crisis later, but I need to see what that is first. So we'll get to that. Okay, we have FDR's New Deal. One sec. You ever get like that? They just skin off your lip. And like, go ahead. So the New Deal was a government policy passed by Ronald Reagan back in 1933, during the term of his presidency, so 1933 to 1943, and it provided jobs to the unemployed workers and helped give investors insurance, and that a bank could not essentially pull all their stocks from by promoting a welfare state. While promoting a welfare state. It was basically like people couldn't just all of a sudden take everything out, especially like top CEOs or investors, because people at the top might have like 30% or 40% of a company in stocks because they're the main decision makers. Because realistically, the owner is going to have more than 50% of stocks unless they're distributing it with the people. How do I explain it? So like, if I had, so let's just say I have these paints from my painting. So I have 4 paints, right? And if I had 1 paint and my customers had 1 paint in stocks, and then someone other than me, even though I'm the person who made it, if someone other than me has like 2 stocks, the remaining 2 stocks, then like I just have no say in what goes on. You'll see that in things like Shark Tank. People, it's more with privatized things, but we're talking about more public things like banks. But private investors who have the majority of stocks would essentially take out their stocks in fear of prices going down from other countries being economic competitors for industries like car manufacturing or oil and gas exports, and they would take everything out because they were afraid of how that would affect their industry, and then people would just be left with nothing, so then they would pull out, and then banks would fail, and then people would be left in shambles. So in order to stop that, the government passed policies not necessarily to affect the consumer, the average everyday consumer who maybe has like 0.1% in stock in that company, but more so to stop the big pencil pushers at the top who have like 40 to 50% of the stock, you know? So that's the main reason of why FDR's New Deal was employed, and it helped stabilize it so then that wouldn't happen again. And the New Deal itself, one sec, I have a thing on here for the New Deal that I want to see. Inflation, don't need that. Welfare state, don't need that. Economy, don't need that. Did I just delete the New Deal? No. Here we go. The New Deal was a series of domestic programs, public work projects, and financial reforms and regulations enacted by President Franklin D. Roosevelt in the United States between 1933 and Yeah, that's what I was thinking of. It was basically Keynesian economics that were adapted by Ronald Reagan and implemented during his presidency, and then they kind of fell out of favor afterwards towards the 1970s. And the 1970s, I think, was also about the time of when, like socially, it started to shift more towards the left, and people started to vote for change. I believe it was around that time of when women's rights were starting to be recognized more. But we'll get into that. But that's what the New Deal is. And then if I tap on here, it was a deal that would provide more jobs, but it wouldn't just provide more jobs and band-aid it, because then that's just coming out of the government's pocket, and then if they want to continue that, they need to tax more, and then that just, you're printing money out of nowhere and giving it no value. But instead of just band-aiding it, they also ensured that things like that could not happen again. Kind of like with the Anti-Sherman Trust Act, or the Antitrust Act, sorry, the Sherman Antitrust Act. It was kind of like with that. It was an insurance that it could not happen and continue to happen, which ultimately would benefit the economy in the long run. But eventually people were like, I kind of want my own paycheck. I don't want to give 50% of the government, which is fair. So it was signed while in 1923, 1946. It was in the United States, but was it implemented in, no, we just talked about Canada's response. Yeah, no, we just talked about Canada's response. Canada, I think, was separate from that, but it was definitely felt by it. And it was because the economic state of the U.S. post-depression made it harder for Americans to live a normal working wage and living and provided it for their families. This deal helped give immediate jobs to those affected, and it would ensure that things like this would not happen again, that they could be able to withstand another kind of economic crisis. Here's the image of FDR signing the New Deal on history.com. You can see this right there. And then over here we have a research video and research article and applications. Yeah, it's just current applications. It holds companies to a higher standard than that. It's just really a preparation that it's made for the regulation that it's made. And here you saw definitely more of a socialist movement, because I think that for the last 2 or 3 slides it's been kind of the same. FDR's New Deal intention economics was kind of one of the same. Franklin D. Roosevelt kind of adopted. It wasn't Ronald Reagan. It was Franklin D. Roosevelt who adopted intention economics to fit the needs of American populace at that point. And it was more socialist shift, very socialist, providing welfare, and it was over the good of the many, over the good of the few. Much more government regulations on taxation and spending and the economy. Yeah, it was definitely more socialist. But we have one more in this, right? Canada's also post-World War II economy. After World War II, Canada, much like the U.S., was finding these restraints from war effort. This made consumerism start to recover, even while the economy became more unstable. So it kind of opened up a period of stagflation, which is understandable, because when you're funding war efforts, obviously not everyone is going to be living really luxurious life. There's going to be sacrifices. And finally, after World War II, that was able to lift a bit. So much like the U.S. after, it started to be able to shift more towards the right, more liberal, I would say, on the scale, because you're not having to tax people as much. You're not having to implement tension economics, because people are going to be spending more, and they're going to feel more comfortable spending, because it's a victory, it's an economic boom. And it was around this time, I believe, let me double check. I don't know, it was closer to 1990. It was closer to 1990 aspects of the economy weren't immediately better. They were starting to recover, and the strain of war efforts finally be lifted, tax cuts, and industrial growth could resume. I have an image over there of Canadian soldiers. I presume I can't quite see the site, and I could not find what I was looking for exactly, so I am going to assume that this is some sort of Canadian soldiers after World War II. The image is from Canada History, so that's why I did assume. I didn't just assume looking off the random image. But there's the link there. There's a YouTube video and a research article that will go over more. But yeah, it shifted from more socialist to liberal, so a bit more of a right shift. Still very much on the left spectrum for Canada at least, but there was an ease on government control, but there was still an equal kind of centered idea around economic growth. Here we have officially the first half of the slideshow. Anyone who is watching this is watching this so far, and there will be a preview at the end, so I hope that there are people who are here by the end. Hours. I'm just gonna take a quick water break to go back to normal. It was my birthday last month. Someone messaged me and said that it was a bit loud. But I suppose now we can watch some videos for a second. This one felt fine. If someone's in the chat, can you tell me if you want to see a video on a short video on FDR's New Deal or Keynesian economics? They're kind of one and the same, but if anyone's in there, let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to play something. Anyone want to choose? Alright, I'm just going to choose one then. I think FDR's deal. Okay, we'll watch a little bit of this. I don't want to watch the whole thing. Okay.
Hi, I'm John.
Oh, but I had muted Desktop. Fast Talk Audio. 1 sec. I think this will work.
Green, this is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to get a little bit controversial as we discuss the FDR administration's response to the Great Depression, the New Deal. That's the National Recovery Administration, by the way, not the National Rifle Association or the No Rodents Allowed Club, which I'm a card-carrying member of. Did the New Deal end the Depression? Spoiler alert. Yeah. More controversially, did it destroy American freedom or expand the definition of liberty? In the end, was it a good thing?
Mr. Green. Yes.
Me from the past, you are not qualified to make that statement.
What, I was just trying to be like provocative and controversial. Isn't that what gets used?
Oh, you have the worst ideas about how to make people like you. But anyway, not everything about the New Deal was controversial. This is Crash Course, not TMZ. The New Deal redefined the role of the federal government for most Americans, and it led to a realignment of the constituents in the Democratic Party, the so-called New Deal Coalition. Good job with the naming there, historians. And regardless of whether you think the New Deal meant more freedom for more people or was a plot by red shirt-wearing communists, the New Deal is extremely important in American history. Wait a second, I'm wearing a red shirt. What are you trying?
Yeah, and he's saying, when he says red shirt kindness, he means because it provided more jobs and more social programs and it promoted a welfare state, which is more communist-centered. But in the end, it was just for the sake of being able to get consumerism or capitalism back on track, I think is what he meant by that. I could always be wrong. I'm not the expert here, but...
Production, I demand that you dock the wages of the writer who made that joke. So after his mediocre response to the Great Depression, Herbert Hoover did not have any chance of winning the presidential election of 1932, but he also ran like he didn't actually want the job. Plus, his opponent was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was as close to a born politician as the United States has ever seen, except for kid president. The phrase New Deal came from FDR's campaign, and when he was running, FDR suggested that it was the government's responsibility to guarantee every man a right to make a comfortable living, but he didn't say how he meant to accomplish this. Like it wasn't going to come from government spending, since FDR was called
this part and the Social Security Act.
Congress. So WTF-DR was the New Deal? Basically, it was a set of government programs intended to fix the Depression and prevent future depressions. There are a couple of ways historians conceptualize it. One is to categorize the programs by their function. This is where we see the New Deal described as 3 R's. The relief programs gave help, usually money, to poor people in need. Recovery programs were intended to fix the economy in the short run and put people back to work. And lastly, the Run DMC program was designed to increase the sales of Adidas shoes. No, alas, it was reform programs that were designed to regulate the economy in the future to prevent future depression. But some of the programs, like Social Security, don't fit easily into one category, and there are some blurred lines.
Like the government control over investors for banks and such.
Between recovery and reform. Like how do you categorize the bank holiday and the Emergency Banking Act of March 1933, for example? FDR's order to close the banks temporarily also created the FDIC, which ensures individual deposits against future banking disasters. By the way, we still have all that stuff, but was it recovery because it helped the short-term economy by making more stable banks, or was it reform because federal deposit insurance prevents bank runs? A second way to think about the New Deal is to divide it into phases, which historians, with their #1 naming creativity, call the first and second New Deals. This more chronological approach indicates that there has to be some kind of cause and effect thing going on, because otherwise, why would there be a second New Deal if the first one worked so perfectly? The first New Deal comprises Roosevelt's programs before 1935, many of which were passed in the first 100 days of his presidency. It turns out that when it comes to getting our notoriously gridlocked Congress to pass legislation, nothing motivates like crisis and fear. Stan, can I get the foreshadowing filter? We may see this again.
And then Social Security Act.
Universal health insurance. And that brings us to the crowning achievement of the Second New Deal and or the crowning achievement of its communist plot, the Social Security Act of 1935. Social Security included unemployment insurance, aid to the disabled, aid to poor families with children, and of course retirement benefits. Yeah. It was and is funded through payroll taxes rather than general tax revenue, and while state and local governments retained a lot of discretion over how benefits would be distributed, Social Security still represented a transformation in the relationship between the federal government and American citizens. Like before the New Deal, most Americans didn't expect the government to help them in times of economic
that's pretty much all that we needed to see. But yeah, the government basically stepping in, social security, just more social welfare kind of programs and stuff such. But yeah, then we can return, and yeah, I guess we can move up one. Oh wait, these all might just return to. Oh, that sucks. We don't have too many more definitions that we need to go over, but let me just quickly check. Okay. Cool. Oh, and I'm also gonna mute desktop audio, and then we can start playing this. Okay. So the economic crisis of 1970s. It was mainly, I think, 1973 to 1975 is what my research did, or it told me. But it was a time period where oil, there was, I don't really know how to say it, but in an Arab oil embargo that heavily impacted both the U.S. and Canada oil prices, causing a time of inflation and economic stagnation. Now, if I had to say, because I was working on this last night and I was really, really tired, but I would say that the gas shortage, because I don't think it was that the U.S. or Canada was having issue getting oil. I think Canada probably didn't have any issue, especially with Alberta. I think that it might have been more imports to specific parts of the countries, or it might have been an embargo on U.S. and Canadian exports to Arab countries, or is it Arabian? I can't remember. Those kind of countries, and then that affected the prices of oil, which basically limited it for U.S. and Canadian citizens. Let me quickly just check what an embargo is, just to be sure. Embargo. Oh yeah, an embargo. So it's like a ban. So basically, gas exports and imports were banned in Arab from the US and Canada, I'm pretty sure. And what that ultimately meant was that then that was a huge portion of money that was being lost. And then because of that, there were less jobs or less demand. And then that caused issue with, well, gas for everyday American citizens and Canadian citizens. And then that affected the economy. Although it really only lasted 2 years, but the effects continue. So the effects continued for about 2 years. It wasn't the biggest thing, but it was between primarily the United States and Arabia, and it mainly affected them because, well, Canada, the only reason it was probably affected was because it exported most of its stuff to the US, which would then get exported to other countries. In my mind, I'm not, of course, an expert, and I have very surface level knowledge, which is why you can go see this research video or this article, which we'll look at one of these videos or something, or articles, after we finish this little portion of the timeline. And then this is where I got the image. It's just an image of gas shortages back then from the Federal Reserve History website. Here we would probably see, where would we see this? So at this point, we're at a liberal kind of thing, and we're probably seeing, once again, another shift towards leftist. I wouldn't say socialist or communist. It's more leftist. It's government control over the economy, and honestly, it was probably mainly to prevent a crisis from happening, like with the Great Depression. Obviously, it wouldn't happen on that scale again. Not over this. That only lasted like 2 years, pretty much. But it's still just like kind of that preparation that we saw that might come into play. So all in all, I think that it was probably handled to the best of its ability, and I think that the only reason it shifted to more leftist political spectrum is because of the lesson they had learned from the previous time it had happened. Current applications, I don't know. I don't think that there's any consequences that are being felt from that today, or if they are, they're probably more mild. But back then, it was just, it was probably the fear. Because, like, in that Crash Course video, I think it said that, like, fear, if anything, drives companies and government to do things more than anything. and the fear of what the citizens might react to is probably the biggest alarm that was going off. So it's good to see that happened. And in today's world, yeah, we're definitely seeing that. We're definitely seeing that because obviously we're not like with the U.S. and trade, U.S. and Canada tariffs. We're obviously seeing more. What's the word? More apprehensiveness towards it and what the implications could be on it. But yeah, it definitely would. It's definitely probably worse than what this was. But we'll see. We'll have to see. Oh yeah, and it just takes you back. I gotta go up. Sorry about that. So now we're talking about monetarism. So the reason why I have Friedman and Hayek here is because both of these people were involved, and this will be on the Kahoot later. Friedman was the person who came up with monetarism, and then it was implemented by Reagan. That's the guy who implemented the monetarism. It was Reagan who implemented it, and then Franklin Roosevelt implemented Keynesian economics. But Hayek over here, he opposed monetarism, and he thought that governments should not have that much control on the economy. So, but back then, inflation was at an all-time high. At the time, it was at like 20%. And monetarism, so this was coming out of the economic crisis of the 1970s. So it did affect them quite a bit, actually. I didn't realize. But monetarism basically was introduced by Friedman to limit the amount of money within the economy. Because his theory was, so it's like, if I have 6 quadrillion bananas, and people really want bananas, but there's so many, I can't go ahead and charge them like $100 per banana because they're like, well, there's so many. Why is it that much? I'm not gonna buy from you. So the theory of it was, if you bring down the price of something, or no, if you limit the amount of something that there is, then that'll adjust prices accordingly. It was just basically like Keynesian economics was about pumping money into the economy and then taxing it when periods of high spending occurred. But monetarism was kind of the opposite. Take more money out, and then the economy will kind of solve itself in a sense. But that involves a lot of government control. And it was supposedly meant to bring down inflation, and Hayek disagreed with the idea of so much government control and what it has on the economy. He didn't like that. But let me go over this. So this is a picture of Friedman, Milton Friedman. The image is from Wikipedia. Here's the source. And we have a research video and a research article. I don't think this will be the one that we look for a research video or article on, but so it involves the U.S. Federal Reserve, Milton Friedman, and Friedman Hayek. I guess you could also say Ronald Reagan, because he was the one who adapted and implemented it, I'm pretty sure. But and just to clarify, this might be on the Kahoot. I completely forgot what I put on there. It was implemented by both the U.S. and the U.K. It didn't say too much on Canada. I think Canada was probably doing its own thing by that time. They were probably trying to become more independent. But U.S. and the U.K. definitely. It was an economic system that was meant to bring down inflation over a long period of time by controlling the flow of money within an economy or community. So less money circulating within the economy brings down inflation rates over time. It's going to be hard in the short term, but it will be better in the long term. And I'm not 100% sure, but this might be where recession comes from, because recession is bringing down inflation rates over a long time. This might be tied to that. I'll quickly search that out. Is monetarism tied to did I just say brain fart? Recession. Oh, okay. No, a recession is a time period of really high inflation that is brought down, and it's just what you choose to bring it down by. So monetarism was a policy employed to help during a recession. It was the key tactic to bring down inflation rates during a recession. It was popularized during the 70s, so this was around the same time that Keynesian economics started to fall off. And I think that the main people wanted their money to be worth more, and in the end, this would help them with that. I think that's the main reason. And it was first implemented though with U.S. policies in the 1979, and it was mainly implemented blah blah. It drove up interest rates in the moment, but it ultimately helped curb inflation because when your money is worth more, you spend it. I think that was the basic logic. This might be what we watched the YouTube video on. And then, Haig thought that there should be no government control over the economy, while Friedman thought that monetarism should be implemented because he thought it would help. And it ultimately came to fruition, while later falling out of, let me quickly see, later falling out of favor, okay. And I would say, let me get rid of this, one sec. Let me like, boom, wait. There. Okay. On the political spectrum, so I would say, because we just got out of Keynesian economics, we're about at a liberal to centrist standpoint at this point, coming out of the Second World War, and kind of Keynesian economics are falling out of popularity, and taxes aren't as high, but we're starting to see more inflation because of it. So we're about in between liberal and moderate. And then we go more back to leftist again, because then there's a whole bunch of government control, maybe socialist even, but there wasn't really welfare programs implemented because of it, I don't think. It wasn't like it's a response to low employment. It was something that was meant to prevent something like low employment from happening due to another recession or Great Depression. So it was more liberal centrist, kind of in the middle, goes down to leftist, with government control over the economy. And it applies today in the sense that we might see something similar here in Canada or the US with all this tension over tariffs. We might see it, or with Ukraine and Russia, or with Israel and Hamas. There's so many things that are going on in the world right now, especially coming out of COVID-19, that there might be big changes, kind of similar to this, that are implemented. And like right now, when I think of politics, or when I was younger and I thought of politics, I was like, man, these people are so dumb, they don't know what they're doing. And now kind of researching this makes me realize that like things might seem dumb in the moment, but looking back, they are just like kind of shifting from this to that to this to that, and they're actually helping in the long term. So yeah, I don't know, just kind of an eye-opening thought. And then I gotta go back up one. Reaganomics, otherwise known as trickle-down economics, and also referred to by some as supply-side economics. Reaganomics was a government policy employed by former U.S. President Ronald Reagan in order to provide tax cuts and benefits to the upper class, which was meant to encourage spending by the upper class to trickle down the wealth to the rest of the economy. Don't ignore the "the," that's meant to be "the," but it was like, if there's so much taxation on these people with all this money, then they're not going to spend the money. So then what's the point of the taxes? So if we cut their taxes, then they're going to spend more to basically improve their own economy. Like, they're going to spend more money to make more money if it's in their best interest. And then we can use that money to go ahead and help the rest of the economy. So it was definitely trying to be more leftist. Like, I think that is what ties into monetarism. And why? Because 1889 or 1989, I think that's, yeah, I'm pretty sure that they're tied to each other. Reaganomics was the economic policies of the former U.S. President Ronald Reagan, associated especially with the reduction of taxes and promotion of unrestricted free market activity. So it was basically less government control, so then it could help out the rest of the economy grow. It was taking a step back, which is what monetarism was. Basically, it was just like step back and let the economy sort itself out after kind of taking out money from it. So I think what it was essentially was tax cuts, so getting rid of high taxes on everyone, then stepping back, letting the people with more money spend that money, and then coming in and collecting that and circulating it into the economy. Or not stepping in, but it would circulate amongst the economy, and just less government control would ultimately help with interest rates and inflation. That's also what it means by trickle down economics. And disparity. So disparity. It's not like oh no, it's a time period of despair. I'm so afraid. It's not like that. That's what I thought it was before I looked into it. But it's more a wide divide or a gap. It's like there's the upper class, and then there's the middle class, and then lower class, and there's like this huge disparity between them. There's like this 1% and then the 99%. It's like this huge gap, right? That's what disparity means among classes, especially. So economically, disparity means division or separation amongst classes, so a wide divide. And this was primarily seen implemented to get Reaganomics was implemented in 1981 to 1988 or 1989 to get rid of this disparity by letting it trickle down, essentially. Which yeah. So Ronald Reagan over here, image of him. Image is from House of Cards Wikipedia. Not Wikipedia, but it's a House of Cards wiki. Sorry. There's the source image. And we have our research video and our research article. This probably won't be the one that we look at more extensively after. But it was definitely leftist to liberal. Like, there's still government control, but it took a step back. And that also ties into monetarism. It was just a step back. So they're one and the same. A lot of these policies I found were kind of like adapted. Like, I'm not saying he stole anything, but it seems like people like Ronald Reagan or FDR kind of like took ideas from other people and adapted them. Nothing wrong with that. I don't know if they were paid or if they were credited or if they worked in the government or not. I didn't do that much research, but it definitely seems like they're employing tactics. Like, they're not completely original, but maybe it's coincidence. Oh yeah, also need to talk about neoliberal and neoconservatives. So neoliberal policies basically were imposed under the presidency of Ronald Reagan. And it was heavily opposed by neoconservatives who wanted to keep the status quo. Status quo meaning the people in the upper class wanted to keep their money. So even though there's less taxes, the people up on the upper class knew that this would eventually like get rid of their wealth, and they didn't like that. So some people, neoconservatives, people who aren't like all the way over to like right wing or fascist, but people in the conservative thing were probably fine with it, and they didn't realize it, and they just spent money and they went on about their day. But people over more to the far right were like, you can't do this. This is going to ruin us. And it's basically like, how can you do this to me? You're hurting me. And it's like, this is probably going to be a really, really like far pull. But if anyone knows that one scene in SpongeBob of where Patrick eats like all the ice cream and like they do a close up of his stomach, and it's just like he's like bloated with how much he's eaten. And then SpongeBob has like one piece of food, and then Patrick's like, great, now I'm gonna starve. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. That's what the neoconservatives kind of were. They just want it for themselves. That's why they didn't particularly like Ronald Reagan's Reaganomics. But neoliberal policies, that's just saying the idea of letting things sort themselves out. Less government control. Liberal means less government control, but a little bit of it, but less government control overall. So this would be government control in the sense that they're stepping back. The government itself is lifting all these tax cuts and whatnot, and they're letting the society sort themselves out. So it's taking a step towards the right, so liberal, or maybe a bit more between liberal and centrist or moderate. But it's taking a step to the right. No, it's not going over the middle line, but it's still over to the right. And it was heavily opposed, blah, blah, blah. It occurred from 1981 to 1989, Ronald Reagan's presidency, and it happened in the United States. Reaganomics were meant to distribute wealth and help equalize economics within the U.S. And, you know, yeah, it might have worked, actually. But current applications, I would say, here in Canada, well, what happened was we had this carbon tax implemented here in Alberta because we made a whole bunch of like money from our oil and gas industry, and then the government was like, no, you can't do that, and they took a lot of that from a tax thing and they're distributing it to the rest of the economy. So that would be kind of the opposite. And now a bunch of people in Alberta would logically, if we're following this whole timeline, they would logically take a step to saving up money. And then if another Great Depression was to ever happen, and then a whole bunch of people were to pull out of banks and stuff, people maybe in Alberta would be more well off and they would have more money. And then eventually that would lead to Reaganomics, probably, of where governments kind of step back and they're like, we're going to lift the carbon tax. And then people are incentivized to spend more in Alberta, which eventually trickles down to all the other provinces who are more affected. So that's kind of what it was. And that's kind of how it might be implemented in the future if tariffs from the US and Canada start to impact each other a lot. We will have to wait and see. This video has been recorded on March 9th, so we'll have to see. But yeah, and then let's return up. Okay, cool. Thatcherism. Okay, Thatcherism is interesting because it is like the only one that was only implemented in the UK, specifically Britain, because we're taking a step back and we're not talking about the US or Canada or Europe anymore. We're specifically talking about the UK. Thatcherism associated with the UK only for the Kahoot. So Thatcherism was high taxation and government control over British free market trade had led to a stagnant period for their economy. So that whole thing of where the taxes get high and the economy slows down, and you know, government control was high as well in British or Britain. The government was so large to the point of where nothing would get done. The only thing that would probably get passed is more taxes. So yeah, it was kind of like corrupt in a sense. I'm not gonna make any statements, but it was definitely more corrupt than anything. And then this lady called Margaret Thatcher came along, and she employed the ideals of Thatcherism to create a smaller state and lower taxes by reducing government control over the British economy. So Thatcherism is just, think of it as culling the curd. Kind of like, not exactly, I'm not going to support Trump's actions, and I'm not going to support anyone's actions. This is totally unbiased. This is just some dumb high school student making a video, very poorly prepared, but it's like similar to how in 2025 Trump got into office and then started cutting government funding from certain things and cutting staff, and he's just culling the curd. And it might be because he wants more control over the economy. It might be because he wants more control over the political office. But either way, it's meant to help lower taxation, and it's meant to lessen government control by giving one person more power to make the right decisions, in a sense, or just to make it so more stuff can get voted and passed. Kind of like in Canada, I guess, we have this whole system. A lot of US viewers probably won't know about it, but basically we go ahead and we go through this whole thing in like our municipal, provincial, which is just state level for you guys. Our provinces are states here. So municipal, provincial, and then federal. So like prime minister, president, whatever. And then that goes to another person. It goes to this when we're trying to pass laws or bills or policies. Then that goes to the crown, and they basically do this whole process as well. And then they get the ultimate final say. And it's just this. There's this governor general, someone, and they end up choosing, and it's meant to be unbiased. But a lot of stuff doesn't get done, which is annoying because when you want to make big changes, it doesn't happen often, so it's annoying. But at the same time, Thatcherism was meant to stop that. Thatcherism, Margaret Thatcher, it was an idea of centralized power among one political figure to help get change done in the government, or just culling the curd. You don't have to completely cut all government, or you don't have to give one person more power. It's just, if you have a whole bunch of naysayers and a whole bunch of people who are acting in their own self-interest, kind of like what was happening in Britain with all these people not wanting to, it was more conservative at that point, then this is a way of how you can kind of get stuff done, and you can start to provide for the people who are less fortunate or who are not able to make a proper living compared to others. It was implemented during her governing from 1979 up until her resignation in 1990. It was in Britain, and she did it because she found that British policies often had nothing happen out of them. Like, it was just useless, partly due to corruption and being in a conservative mindset at that time in Britain amongst the cabinet and the ministers. So yeah, this was meant to be a solution, because you know, those British people, so greedy. This is an image of Margaret Thatcher. It is from Botanica. Here's the link. Here's a YouTube video and a research article. I don't think we'll have to go into depth on this. Pretty simple. And there's definitely right wing to conservative, left shift to centralist or liberal. A lot of people did not like Margaret Thatcher, and you will see a lot of biased articles online saying Margaret Thatcher sucks and I hate her. And it's reality. I don't think she was that bad. I think that you know, if things are kind of corrupt, you obviously got to give it a try. Obviously, I'm not an expert. I did not live through any of it. I blah blah blah. I'm just a person living in the western parts, Canada specifically, and you know, it's just my opinion. Take it how you want. I'm trying to get this information out, partly for a school project, but also partly because I genuinely want to provide anyone who's watching with some sort of info that they might take away from and be like, huh, I can kind of see if how that might apply in your life. And maybe you'll go out and you'll look into this on your own time. And I hope that this maybe inspires something in someone to take the time to find their own answers to things. Because I certainly got a lot of answers out of my own questions, but yeah. And then we gotta go up because I did not format this properly. I was super tired, but I got this done really quick. Sorry if it's a bit messy. The only reason I'm not showing these definitions is because I can pretty much explain them, and if I need to, I'll clarify. But then we have the 2008 mortgage crisis. So technically, sources are conflicting, but I think that started to become an issue in 2007. 2008 is when it hit off, and then it lasted until about 2010 when new policies were implemented that helped call or slow the economic crisis. So essentially, and I have a bit of background knowledge because I watched a video in school about this, but what would happen is people would mortgage their houses because they were being told that it was like liquefy your home, or like your home is like this mountain of gold that you're just waiting to tap into. It was tap your house potential or something. And it convinced a lot of seniors who, they weren't conservative themselves, but they were more conservative on the spectrum where they had stuff and they weren't giving it up, so they were kind of like stagnating the economy a bit. They're old, they're keeping what they have, and then they're just gonna pass that down. So normally, yeah, that's a bit conservative, but in the end, it's not too big of a deal. But then these mortgage companies came along and they took that way to an extreme. They were basically like, oh, you're gonna. They didn't say this, but the mindset kind of was, oh, you're going to go ahead and pass down your family within generations. That's a conservative view. Classical liberalism, different from modern liberalism, was basically like less government control over government economy, and that ended up leading to people in the upper class keeping wealth amongst themselves. And that's kind of like what it was back in 2007. People were going to die and just pass their houses on to inheritance and stuff. But it wasn't the biggest issue. But then these people made it worse, in a sense. They basically came along, they convinced seniors to mortgage their houses for money so they could live more extravagant lives, and then they would put in all these little clauses, and they would drive up the prices of the mortgage itself, like with interest. So if you don't pay this back within a certain amount of time, it's going to gain 12% interest and per month or per year, and then that's going to quickly develop into something that you can't pay. And it's totally unfair in some circumstances, and it led to a lot of people going into debt where they could not afford to pay back what they were basically owed, or what they owed someone else, and it sucks. And a lot of people lost their homes because of this. And then what these mortgage companies would do is they would take these houses that were just going to be inherited, and they would just stockpile them, and they would try to resell them, which on its own is kind of fine. It's kind of like spreading wealth. But it wasn't fair how they went about it with no regulations, because then, obviously, like people might need those homes, and sure, if it happens to someone who didn't need that home, that's fine, I guess. Not really, but you know, I guess it's good for the economy. But then you're going ahead and you're maybe taking it away from someone who does need it, or maybe you're taking it away from someone who lives with their parents or their grandparents who did need that house and now don't have anywhere to live. Or maybe they were going to inherit it, and maybe that was going to help them because they're in a poor financial state. You know, it's just scummy in general. So it was a lot more harm than originally good. And then, to add on to it, what would happen is these people would just buy out so much property, and then there would be no actual homes that could be bought because people would privately buy them, and they would basically wait for housing prices to rise, and then they could sell them for more money. That's why housing prices have. It's not the reason, but it's a big reason of why housing prices today for a home, like a nice home, can be upwards of $1 million. Well, back then, it's also adjusting for inflation and the cost of currency, but it's also a big reason of why houses back then were so much cheaper. So this really drove it up, and people would sell it for capital gains, which is just, well, when your capital gains value due to scarcity in the market. So they would basically cause this scarcity or this influx so then they could gain off of it. And it's really scummy, and it was more of an issue than the issue originally was itself, of people being kind of conservative and keeping things to themselves. So if we click on this, I would say people, if we're talking about old people, and we're talking about then this whole housing crisis thing, I would say it was conservative at the start, not too conservative. I'd say it's moderate to conservative. It's not terrible. And then you just take it to right wing. Like it's like these housing companies would just be eating these houses up, and then it would just create scarcity and homelessness and poverty, and it sucked. And it affected a lot of people, you know? So yeah, credit mortgage, basically a mortgage would just be getting credit for, or basically a loan on the value of your house, and then having to pay that back with interest. And then they would have some sort of clause in the fine print that jacked up the price to like 200, 400% interest, and then people would lose their houses, and then they would resell it or they would hoard it to drive up the value of those houses. So very scummy thing to do, but it was in the US and Canada primarily. It was obviously in other places probably, but I didn't research that much. But it was a housing crisis due to primarily seniors being convinced to mortgage, convinced to mortgage their houses, which led to many factors, which led, LED, not lead, which led to many of them being repossessed and bought up by large real estate companies, causing a housing crisis among Western countries. It was between 2007 to 2010, it was primarily in the US and Canada, and it was because of inadequate government regulations and policies against these real estate companies from just buying up things and hoarding them and jacking up prices. And then there's a little political cartoon image here. Well, there goes the whole neighborhood, because like as soon as one person mortgage, then like everyone just goes down in mortgages, and then the economy just takes a hit. And then it was from the Blue Tree Savings. Here's the link down here, but you can also just go Blue Tree Savings if you don't want to type all that in. That's a really long one. Here's the research video and research article that I used. I don't think we'll be looking at those. This one seems pretty solid and easy to understand. And then we have, we only got 2 more. We're almost there. Then we have the pandemic and its impact on the economy from 2019 to 2023. A lot of sources were saying 2020 to 2023, but to be fair, the first reported case of COVID-19 was in 2019. I researched that, I'm pretty sure. So I just said 2019 to 2023 to be safe, but it became a pandemic more in 2020 to 2023. But what happened with it, as we all probably know if you were around back then and you were old enough to understand, is travel shut down because this virus became widespread and it began killing people, and then governments started closing down their countries, which kind of hurt economy, because obviously you got to shut down tourism, you got to shut down trade, because it can be transmitted through any number of factors, and you know, you can't take any risks. And then businesses were hit hard because a lot of things just couldn't be done in person anymore due to government regulations. Governments were like, no, you cannot do this, you cannot do that. They shut down a lot of companies. The government technically was responsible for a lot of companies going under, but the worldwide economy, began to plummet, and like it had never seen before. I don't know if it was as bad as other times, but it was. So here's an image. It's just a little 3D model of what you would expect a virus to look like. Images from CDC. There's a source image, research video, and article. So it was COVID-19, and it affected the entire world. And it basically, so an epidemic is within one country a virus or disease or whatever, a contaminant strain that kills people or affects people's lives, like polio or cancer, or not cancer, polio or some sort of disease that can spread that has occurred in one country but has remained in that one country. That's an epidemic, and that was sort of what happened in China when it first appeared. Uh, it sort of stayed in its own little zone, and then it managed to get free, and then everything went, like, everything hit the fan, and everyone started panicking, and people would buy out, like, toilet paper and stuff, and some economies, or some businesses saw a lot of success, others not so much, but in general, it was mostly a deficit, but it caused worldwide shutdown of trade, travel, borders. It staggered the economy for a lot of countries. And the first report case, like I said, was in 2019, but it officially became a pandemic in 2020. So that's when it started to spread to other countries. It originated in China, spreading quickly across the globe, and they think that it originated from a bat that someone ate when they went to a wet market. Because in China, I'm not an expert on culture, but in China, they were reporting on how wet markets could have caused it. Basically, like eating animals raw, cooked, all that, like exotic animals, which can be considered delicacy in some places. But a lot of them, if not cooked, can have things like Ebola and a whole bunch of different viruses. And this was one of those viruses that was a bit worse than all the others that someone was unfortunate enough to consume, most likely. That's how the theories go. There's some conspiracy stuff about it being created in a lab as like a weapon. I doubt that. And then we have a research video and our research article. I would say it went from, in modern times, because aside from the housing thing, the worldwide economy had shifted from leftist to more liberal, moderate, except the housing crisis, which I would say was more separate. The housing itself was more among seniors who were conservative, kind of moderate conservative, and then the housing companies and real estate agencies, they went full right wing. But in the grand scheme of things, worldwide economy, especially in Canada and the US, was probably more liberal, moderate. Things had taken a step back ever since monetarism had been implemented. So it definitely took a step to the right, but it was still liberal, moderate, kind of in the middle of those two. And then it probably went conservative. I won't lie. It definitely took a far right turn, and people, especially governments and countries, were like, we have to keep our people, we have to focus on ourselves, and we have to stop the spread. And that ended up hurting a lot of economies, but it was definitely necessary. But that's what I would say it shifted, kind of. Current applications, there was a lot of downsides, but there were some good things that came out of it. There were some companies that originated from the pandemic. The Netflix saw a rise, and a lot of shows got more opportunities than they probably would have otherwise. Gaming, they took a big upturn. A lot of at-home things that you could do took a big upturn. Online work from home took an upturn. Shorter work days in the process have been more advocated for. But in general, I would say it gave later on, it gave more economic opportunities, but it was initially a huge drawback and a factor why many companies shut down. I mean, I recently saw that like Toys R Us here in my place where I live in Canada had shut down. So I don't know if that's a contributing factor, but like it's crazy, you know? And you think in your mind maybe that's the reason why. So who knows? And let's return. Let's go up, and then last one. Let me search up, because I know what liberalist and all that is, but I want to make sure for the last definition that libertarianism is properly defined. Yeah, so libertarianism is basically just like freedom and rights of citizens, free of government control, kind of like what Hayek wanted with monetarism. Yeah, monetarism. It's kind of like what more Hayek thought. I don't know if I say his name. Less control over the economy. I would say maybe Hayek wanted more right-leaning. I don't know how far, because monetarism itself was more left-wing rather than liberal or liberal moderate. But I don't know if Hayek wanted more of a conservative view on things, of where the government should have no control and should only be upholding traditions, and people should be able to do whatever, and then these monopolies come into play. But libertarianism is kind of like less control. It's not conservative. It's still liberal, but it's less influence on the economy. I'm pretty sure. Oh no, sorry. It's not. Economically, the government still has a bit of control, but the government tries to prioritize the citizens' freedom and right to pursue their own goals and sovereignty. It's not like socialist communist, of where individual rights and freedoms are kind of smothered to ensure the rights and freedoms of everyone else. It's every individual has their own opportunity to make something of their lives, or to pursue their own freedom. More specifically, economically, there's still a bit of control by the government, so that's why you would see it more on the liberal kind of scale, liberal central kind of thing. But then today we see, so this is present day, not president day. In present day, current economic events, 2022 to 2025, we see more of a libertarian government. It's opposed to, we see a shift from a more libertarian government to a more conservative government, both in the U.S. and Canada, due to like the tariffs and trade and even with things like this war and Hamas and Israel and with Ukraine and Russia. We're seeing a lot more countries, like I think it was more the U.S. Just now who started, but kind of closing themselves off and focusing on themselves more than anything. So yeah, it's definitely shifting. But let me regain my. Okay, and it's where governments are starting to now focus more on themselves and their citizens rather than immigration, trade, world economics, stuff like that, while still focusing on some social aspects such as welfare and social programs. Here in Canada, there was this thing of where for the month of December, I think, or February or December, I can't remember which, but Trudeau basically got rid of the GST, which was huge for a lot of families because usually the GST really impacts grocery bills, and it allowed like low-income families with children to finally be able to afford food, and then he took away. And I'm pretty sure that he also gave like an amount of money as well that people could spend on groceries. It was like $100 or something, and it was nice of him. But I think that it was mainly just so he was trying to like gain public favor, so he would be reelected. For anyone watching in like 2050, he's not very liked right now, not at all. But I doubt anyone will see this once it gets uploaded to YouTube. But yeah, so that's kind of what today's looking like. No images or videos for this one. Pretty self-explanatory for anyone living in this time period. Main problems in the world: U.S. and Canada relations. Since Trump got into office, Trump has instated tariffs, and Canada has instated tariffs back. And Ukraine and Russia are having this war. Russia wants Ukraine to join it, and Ukraine wants to maintain its sovereignty from Russia. There was a whole bunch of stuff. Like Ukraine gave up its nuclear defense missiles a long time ago in exchange to not have this happen, and it still happened, and no one can do anything because of nuclear weapons, which are like kind of like mutually assured destruction, MAD, that kind of it's meant to deter people from confrontation, but at the same time it's making it so people who don't have nuclear weapons can't defend themselves, and no one else can really go in and stop them, because then what are you going to do if they decide to fire a nuke and you decide to fire a nuke and respond? It's also between Israel and Hamas, and kind of this dispute over who owns Israel, I'm pretty sure, or Islam. I'm very unfamiliar with these kind of things, but it's basically like they're fighting over this piece of land who they each think should get it. But it also started because there were these murderings of children and other horrific things, and that ended up with a bunch of blood on each other's hands and a bunch of public turmoil and people saying who's right and who's wrong, and yeah, a lot of tension. And it's still being felt today. There's a lot of problems in the world, but I think we'll get through them. So yeah, it's just political and international conflicts, and I already explained a bunch of that stuff. It's all across the world. The entire world's feeling this, I'd say. I don't know of any countries that wouldn't be. And it's because of growing political and international tensions, and it is causing prices on a lot of things to go up, especially here in Canada and the US with tariffs. It's causing a lot of war strain on Ukraine and Russia. So like taxes and more socialist, I would say, on the spectrum, because they're having to band together and like fight for their country, which means that a lot of rights are being taken to ensure that everyone can have them in the future. And then here in Canada, it's definitely more liberal, not far left as those, but liberal, kind of, we're protecting ourselves rather than encouraging trade. So maybe more leftist, actually. Leftist, probably, because they're imposing tariffs, which is pretty big. And then in Hamas and Israel, I would say, I think, let me quickly check. Yeah, so left-leaning people are more likely to resort to violence, which is why I said that Russia and Ukraine are probably more socialist communists, because now they're resorting to violence to solve their differences. Same with Israel and Hamas, so they're probably on the left side too far left. Canada is probably more leftist to liberal, maybe in the middle, with the tariffs. And yeah, we'll see how it goes, but it affects us in every aspect of the day. And we'll have to see how we learn from these mistakes in the past and how we grow from them. So yeah, best of luck to everyone. And with that, we have officially finished that. So let me quickly check chat. I didn't see this. How do I remove this? I can't remove it. What, can I? No, whatever. I don't think I can remove that guy's message. Not in OBS at least. But yeah, anyone who's still here, thank you for watching. I'm gonna quickly check to see if anyone is watching, and then we might do the Kahoot if anyone is still here. I think it is just me. And like my little phone that I'm walking the phone. If anyone's here, can you say something? Just so I know that like I'm not all on my own here. Oh, hello. Did you want to stay for a Kahoot, new viewer? Or old viewer? I don't know, I joined on my phone. But whoever is in here, do you want to do a Kahoot that I have made? I want to show it off, but like, no one's in here. I went through the whole presentation already. I guess I'll just go through the Kahoot just to show what it was. The Kahoot was full of... Here we go. It was just questions like who created monetarism, Friedman or Hayek. It was Friedman. Hayek opposed it. The most left-leaning ideology, that's FDR, the New Deal. It was definitely the most left-leaning because it gave the most jobs and most welfare programs. Is definitely the most left. Which of the following is not a policy originally proposed by the government or government officials? Blah blah blah. That one was I don't remember which one that was. It was Keynesian economics or monetarism. Those ones were originally developed by people who then had their idea kind of reformed for political purposes. Like monetarism was employed by, I think, Reagan is what we said, and then Keynesian economics was employed by FDR for the New Deal. And then the Antitrust Act, it was signed 1939? 1890, my bad. That's when it was first put into place. I can't believe I don't know my own questions. And then there's dog photos here. Which countries primarily use Thatcherism? The UK. Who invented the New Deal? Roosevelt. Where did Thatcherism first take place? This is more specific than the UK or whatever. It's Britain, technically. Who opposed Reaganomics? This is a callback to Friedman and Hayek. It's Hayek. But over here we're saying neoconservatives, because neoconservatives want to keep the status quo, and that's not something that oh, sorry, this is for Reaganomics, trickle-down economy. The neoconservatives, not the regular conservatives, but far-leaning right people were like, no, you can't do this. This will affect me so much in the future. What was the biggest factor in the Great Depression? It was the stock market crash. Where does liberalism stand on the political scale? It's left. It's near the middle kind of left. It's not in the middle, but it's near the middle left. It's just that it's the best selected answer, so that's why I said near the middle, because I didn't say in the center, I didn't say far right or far left. What did Keynesian economics do? It pumped in money while raising taxes at times of high spending. So it lowered taxes and it raised taxes technically, so that's why I put both. And then, did you enjoy this presentation? And then if you said no, I was going to be like, I like your honesty. And then how would you rate this on a scale of 1 to 4? And then all 4s except for blue 4 for some reason. And amazing. How did you find the stream? And then just last dog pick. So yeah, anyone who has watched, thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. I hope you learned something, and I had a great time presenting. And yeah, I hope everyone has a great rest of their day. But yeah, bye. How do I shut this down?